everyone. We're going to talk quickly here about how to write a works cited list and then how to use those works cited within your essay that you're working on. So a lot of this is going to be reviewed for you guys, but I just want to make sure that this is something we understand because this is super important, both now and when you get to Comp 2 and then through the rest of your college careers. This is going to keep being a thing, so let's just make sure we get it right the first time. So quickly, the works cited list is, the name might indicate, the list of works that you cited in your paper. There are two parts to citation in MLA format, and this is also true in APA and most other citation styles. We'll focus on MLA for now. The in-text citation and the works cited list. The in-text citation it's right there in the body of the paper, and it gives the reader enough information to connect what you wrote in the body of your paper to the works cited list, so that if they want more information about what you're writing about, they can then connect that source in the works cited list. The works cited list then gives them enough information to go find that source for themselves if they absolutely have to go read it. So this is a sample of what a works cited list might look like. A lot of these are journal articles. This is a paper that I wrote in graduate school, so it's been a little bit. This was probably spring or fall semester 2005, maybe. So it's been a little bit. But this is a screenshot out of a Microsoft Word doc of what that might look like. So how do you write a works cited list? You guys have no idea how good you have it. When I wrote that works cited list on that previous slide, I had to do this all by hand because the first version of Microsoft Word that came out with a citation generator came out in 2007. It was Office 2007. So that citation generator that's built in there now wasn't a thing at all. And most of the websites that you guys use, like Son of Citation Machine, those didn't exist, or if they did, they were wrong more often than they were right. So different ways you can do this. If you're on a PC that has Microsoft Word, there's a built-in citation generator. You fill in the blanks and it creates one for you. That saves you all the formatting errors that I used to lose points for on paper when I was in college. There are online citation generators, EasyBib, Night Cite's another fill-in-the-blank one. Son of Citation Machine is popular. There are add-ons for Google Classroom or Google Docs. If you're researching in databases, and we'll talk more about that probably in Comp 2, a lot of the databases now have citations for all the articles included as part of the database. The trick there is to make sure that you're getting the right one, because in addition to APA, MLA, Chicago, there are a dozen other ones. Off the top of my head, the American Math Association has their own. The American Sociological Association has their own. There's Blue Book, which is more of a legal thing. There's dozens of them. So just make sure that you're getting at the MLA citation. If you think it looks funny, it's probably the wrong one. That's how I go by that. And then the citation handbooks, there's that Hacker, that's that comb-bound book, Hacker's the author's last name, that you guys got as part of your textbook package. All of the how-tos are in there as well. So if the citation generator is frustrating you, like I said, Son of Citation Machine, sometimes or EasyBib, sometimes they'll give you some really weird looking stuff. Double check with your citation generator. There's also, I didn't put on the slide there, the OWL at Purdue, OWL like the bird, is not a citation generator, but it's a really good reference. It's like that Hacker book on the web. And so it's very easy to access, and it's got a lot of good stuff in it. So I'm just going to break down this works cited entry. This is one works cited entry. Couple things you need to know here. Number one, it doesn't have a hanging indent because Google Slides won't let you do a hanging indent. Normally the second and third lines would be indented 1/2 inch. The other thing you need to know is that the URL is on a separate line because it's too long and I didn't want to wrap the text. Normally the website would be right up there after the 2013 date. So formatting things out of the way, I want to give you guys just more of an understanding of what the pieces are here in this works cited. So that first chunk there, Karimi and Carpenter, those are your authors. That could also be if I was citing the Burlington Community School District, that I could list a corporate author or a group author like that. The next one in quotation marks is the article title. If this were a book, it'd be a little bit different. We'll get to that here in a few minutes. But there in quotation marks is the title. The next one's underneath. You see CNN in italics. That's the name of the website, is CNN. So then it skipped one on me. Date published is April 2013. Oh, there it is. It put the publisher slug in there late, but the cable news network is also the owner or the publisher. The name of the website is CNN. CNN stands for Cable News Network, and that's how their copyright is listed. So they own it or they publish it. The URL or the location is right there. That's your next thing in there. If there were a DOI, that's a digital object identifier, that would go there instead. And then the access date. When you're talking about online sources, the reason we throw the access date in there is that these things change. If you look at that article that I've got there, it's 7 years old. And things change in 7 years. Sometimes you'll see what they call an update or a retraction. A retraction means that they don't stand by the article anymore. And recently, The Atlantic, which is a fairly well-known, fairly well-respected magazine, retracted an entire article, not just part of it, the entire article. It was about using fringe sports like squash and fencing as Ivy League recruiting strategies. And they ended up having to retract the entire article. It was very bizarre. And if you're interested, Google it. It's kind of interesting to read. But I had read the entire article before it was retracted. And so I followed this saga as it happened. And you got a note at the top of it says, okay, we now realize that this part wasn't true. And now they've removed the entire article. If I were writing a paper and using that, first of all, I'd have to question the quality of my source. And if I didn't go back and find that out, somebody else reading my paper would question the quality of my source. So if you're looking at an older source and your accessed date is several years old, you might want to go back and make sure it's still there and it still says what you think it says. So right there is like a wall of text, and I'm gonna put this slideshow in the files section of Canvas as well, so you'll have access to the slides themselves, so you can get that URL. What that general format shows you in that first block of text, where it says author, title, title of container, that kind of thing. This is every single piece of where what you might have to include in a citation. Now, most of your citations are not going to have all of those pieces. This is like when you're assembling the bookshelf from Walmart and they give you 14 extra screws sometimes, and you're going, do I have all of these? You're not going to use all of these. This is your Walmart bookshelf, but you're going to use the ones that apply. Sometimes your piece doesn't have an author, so you start right there with the title. Sometimes it may not have other contributors like translators or editors. Sometimes there's not a version. Sometimes there's not a specific second container. That's the location of it. So there are all kinds of these things that it's not going to necessarily be. If you have a paper source, date of access isn't going to matter. The books that are printed in my classroom that were printed in the 1980s haven't changed since they were printed in the 1980s. That's why we have the date or the versions that we know when things have changed like that. But that's not going to be a situation for a printed source, obviously. So the URL there, that very long one, that's that Owlet Purdue site that I referenced. It's an MLA page within it that talks about electronic sources. I'm going to guess that until you have a professor that forces / heavily suggests that you use some non-electronic sources, 99% of your sources are going to be electronic, because that's the way the world works right now. And so I figured giving you that website directly is going to be the most useful thing I can do for you. So that's the overview of how the Works Cited thing works. So then when are we using these sources that we're citing? We're using them obviously to support your ideas. And it says good speeches because I missed editing that, sorry. I teach this in both speech and in composition, and the same ideas hold true. Good speeches or good papers need specific pieces of information. That first line is kind of meant to be ironic. Generalizations are fine, but sometimes they are not fine. That doesn't give us any information that's useful at all. It's meant to be a little bit ironic. But the idea there is that we can use generalizations, but they work as long as everybody believes them. If I tell you that broccoli is good for you, that's a generalization. Broccoli is a green vegetable. Most of us think that green vegetables are good for us. That works until you run into somebody that's allergic to broccoli, or somebody whose great aunt choked on a piece of broccoli and died. So generalizations work until you run into somebody who doesn't believe them. A generalization that, according to a study by the Harvard researchers Penn and Teller, the use of generalizations in writing makes an audience 65% less likely to believe the claims being made. That's a huge generalization there. That's also a humorous citation for those of you who know Penn and Teller are. There's no way to really quantify that, and it's an example of why an audience may not believe it. So one way that you can use sources or support is a brief example, otherwise known as a specific instance. This needs to be specific and identifiable, not just once there was this person who did this thing. If we're going to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement and we're going to talk about police brutality, we would need to use specific identifiable situations, names. And we can all name George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and other people who have been, unfortunately, part of this and known by name because of what's been done to them. You can have multiple instances to create an impression. Think about a speech or a paper that starts giving all the examples of people who have been killed through police brutality incidents. That's going to create an impression. Make sure it's the impression you want to create on your audience. You can also do an extended example. This is that narrative thing that we did earlier in the year. It has a longer, more detailed story. You need to make sure that you're only including what's relevant in your details and that there's a point and that you clearly tie the point in and keep the reader with you. Otherwise, at some point, they're going to go, what on earth is happening here? We all have that friend who tells these stories and they never get to the point, or when they do, the point isn't related to anything we were talking about. My 12-year-old's really good at this. Don't be that person, guys. Make sure that the story you're telling has all the details you need, none of the ones you don't need, and it actually ties into what you're talking about. You can also use a hypothetical example. Rule number one of using hypothetical examples is that you make sure that you announce that it is a hypothetical example. You don't want to bait and switch your reader, because if you tell them this story, and hypotheticals are usually very carefully constructed to make a specific point, but if you're telling them this hypothetical story that gets them to buy into what you're saying, and then you pull the wool out from under, or the rug out from them and go, oh, by the way, that wasn't real. You've got to do this carefully or they're going to feel betrayed, and then they're done with you at that point. So make sure that you do connect it back to real life information that ties this to reality. Even though it's hypothetical, it has to be realistic. If I'm writing a paper about early childhood literacy, and I'm talking about a 2-year-old that is fluently reading Shakespeare while doing vector calculus, if there are no examples of this ever found in human existence ever, I've probably overstretched and nobody's going to believe it. Make sure your hypotheticals are believable, even if they're constructed for the purpose of your argument. So 3 different reasons that we use examples or source information. Number 1 is to clarify. We're going to take abstract or bigger ideas and put them in concrete terms that we can attach something to. So if I'm trying to explain the idea that early childhood literacy is an essential component to child development and learning, that sounds really good, but I need to be able to give examples of the fact that in a study of a large number of children, those who didn't read at grade level by third grade had these documented issues or concerns or challenges later on. We're also going to reinforce by putting large numbers into human terms. When you hear things like there have been 250,000, and I'm pulling that number off the top of my head, so forgive me if I'm a little bit off. 250,000 people have died from the coronavirus. One of the best examples I saw of that was somebody listed off all the towns in Iowa that you'd have to go through to get 250,000 people. 250,000 people is enough that most of us can't picture that, but we can picture about how many people are in Fort Madison and what it would like if Fort Madison wasn't there anymore, and how many Fort Madisons that would take. These examples also can personalize. It puts a name and a face on an issue. If you go back to my Black Lives Matter example, that's why advocates of the Black Lives Matter movement have been so adamant about using people's names, because it humanizes the issue and it connects and puts a real person with a real face with 10 fingers and 10 toes and a mom and a dad and all of that. And that brings your audience or your reader in and helps them understand your point. Statistics are a great way to prove your point if you use them well, and if you use them poorly, they confuse people. This is the idea of using numerical data to support a point or an idea. Most of you guys know I'm not a numbers person, I'm not a math person. So more of your audience is like me than you think. You need to make sure that if you are using numbers, you are using them appropriately. You have to use them in context. If I'm having a conversation about the number of people that have been pulled over for not wearing their seat belts in the last 6 months, and I say that in Iowa there have been, I'm going to make up a number, 20,000 people that have received tickets for not wearing their seat belt in the last 6 months. And that number is down. So people are wearing their seatbelts more. There have been a few other things that have happened in the last 6 months that might have affected that seatbelt usage, like the fact that people have been afraid to go anywhere and that people haven't been traveling as much, traveling through Iowa. So if just because that number is going down doesn't mean that I can say that, well, people are wearing their seatbelts more because there have been fewer tickets written. There's more happening there. The next thing is they have to be representative. They have to be collected appropriately and have an appropriate sample size. An example of this would be if I were trying to find the opinion of all of the students of BHS on requiring PE as part of the curriculum, and I went and surveyed the freshman girls volleyball team. That's probably not enough people. It's definitely not a group that represents the whole school. They are almost, unless there's something that I don't know about, they're all female. They're all in the 9th grade. They're all people who enjoy athletics. And so their responses might not represent the entire student body as a whole. And when you're in other college classes, especially if you're in a social science major or a science major, you will take a statistics class and you'll learn far more about this than I can teach you. You have to use statistical measures correctly and understand what they do. Mean, median, and mode should sound pretty familiar. My 3rd grader was working on those this year. So the mean is the average. If I have 10 numbers, I add them up and divide by 10. The median is if I list the numbers from highest to lowest, the number in the middle of the list. And the mode is if I list all the numbers, which one comes up the most times. You need to know what each of those means and can measure. And if you're not sure what they're reporting, don't use the number. They also have to come from reliable sources. That's a kind of a deep issue right now. What do people consider reliable? How are they getting their sources? If you have questions about this, or if you have questions about a specific source, talk to me and we'll kind of work through it. That there was that video I had you guys watch about the CRAP test. You need to put your statistics through that same kind of information. So you're going to use statistics to quantify your ideas. While I am not a numbers person, I know that some people think better or understand things better when we put actual numbers on them. So if you're trying to give some kind of clarity or quantity to your numbers, that's how you're going to use it. You're going to use them sparingly. If you start rattling off a list of numbers at most people, their eyes glaze over and they quit reading. You must source your statistics. That's that identified sources thing. You must tell us where the numbers came from and who got them for you. And then we can go back, and if we want to know more about the numbers and more about how they got them, we can go read the source ourselves. You also must explain them. That's that context thing. Don't just throw people numbers. Most of us don't understand them well enough to do anything with them, and we're going to skip over them. If you took the time to find them, take the time to explain them. Another type of support that you might use is what's called testimony. This can be quotes or paraphrases, and it can be either expert or peer. So expert testimony holds the most weight. This is an expert in the field. So if I'm writing a paper about psychology and somebody has a PhD in psychology, they're going to be an expert in the field. If I'm writing about personal finance or the economy and I go talk to somebody that's an economist or that works in the finance industry, they're an expert. Peer testimony is other ordinary people who've had this happen to them firsthand. If I'm talking about the benefits of group therapy, somebody who has been part of a therapy group as a patient would be peer testimony. Their information is still valid and useful, but we use them for different things. When we're deciding whether we're going to quote or paraphrase, keep the following in mind. Your quotes need to be brief. 2 or 3 sentences is a good upper limit. It can be a chunk of a sentence. It does not have to be a complete sentence. It also needs to be stuff that is so precisely worded that if you reword it, you're going to change the meaning. That happens less often than you think. There are not that many writers out there that are that profound and that amazing that you cannot change a single word of what they said without ruining it entirely. If you're going to paraphrase, though, you can't just change a single word. It needs to be put in your own words and substantially different than the original. That last part gets people. Some of you learned a trick in elementary school, junior high, heaven only knows when. Well, I'm just going to put synonyms for some of these words in and call it a paraphrase. No. You need your own sentence structure, and if you don't know what that means, come talk to me. A way that you get caught plagiarizing is even when you think that you've done it properly, is when you're going to go, well, that uses the word free, and so I'm going to change the word free to liberate, and I'm going to change the word concentrate to think. That doesn't work, guys. We'll go over some examples of this later in the week, but you've got to make sure that you are putting things into your own words. That also shows that you understand what you're reading. If this class were about just teaching you guys to find information and copy and paste it, it wouldn't be a 12-week class. It'd be 15 minutes long. We'd have time to have coffee at the end. You guys know how to copy and paste stuff. You don't need me to teach you how to do that. So make sure that you're putting things into your own words. So when you're using testimony, whether it's peer or expert, make sure that you are quoting or paraphrasing accurately and that you are using the information in context. When we used something using out of context, the concern is that we could, and you guys see this on videos all the time, they'll get a clip of somebody saying something, and it may be that they're saying, no, absolutely not. I do not support X, Y, and Z. And if you edit that a little bit, it could be turned into I support this. You need to make sure that you're using things accurately and in context. Make sure that you use qualified sources. Jenny McCarthy, for those of you who know her, she's I think we're calling her an actress. I'm not sure. She went on this campaign about not vaccinating people not vaccinating their children. Whatever her personal beliefs are, she does not have any medical qualifications at all. And so she's probably not the best source of information on this kind of thing. Going back to the 1990s, Andre Agassi, for those of you who don't know who he is, he was a world #1 professional tennis player that got a lot of attention because women thought he was nice to look at. He endorsed Canon cameras. He's a professional tennis player, not a photographer. I don't know that he ever used one of those cameras, but he got a lot of money selling them. Probably not the person you want helping you pick out a camera. So make sure that the sources that you're using that are providing your testimony are qualified. Make sure that they are unbiased is hard. Make sure that they're as unbiased as possible and that you're aware of their bias. Somebody can be an expert about something and can still be biased about something. So I'll throw my own profession under the bus. If I am talking about the potential benefit of charter schools, and I am citing someone who's a PhD in education, but they're also the president of the NEA. The NEA is the National Educators Association. The NEA has a platform against charter schools. This PhD from the NEA is going to tell us why charter schools are bad. And they're probably going to have some really good research to back that up. But they've also got their own agenda to avoid having charter schools. So you need to be aware of people's affiliations and background. And you need to let your reader know that. And part of that goes with that next point about identifying the source. Tell us who this person is and where you got this information. That's one of the keys in using any kind of information is tell us where you got it. As long as you can do that, you're in pretty good shape. So as I mentioned before, 2 parts to your citations. There's that works cited list that we went through earlier, and then there's the in-text citation. We call that parenthetical. That goes in parentheses. You need to have both of those for all of your sources. If it's not been cited in parentheses, it doesn't go in the works cited list. If it's been cited in parentheses, it has to go in the works cited list. One of the proofreading steps for a paper that uses multiple sources should probably be to go through that works cited list and see if you can match it to at least one citation, and then go through your citations and make sure you can match it back to the works cited list. When you're peer reviewing, that's also a handy thing to do. It's one of those things that you can do that helps out a lot. Now, in College Comp 1, and if you take Comp 2 with me, I can't vouch for other people. Things like that, when they happen, are citation errors, and you're here to learn how not to do that. Later on in your academic career, failure to cite things properly can be considered plagiarism, and it can do terrible things to your grade and your ability to maintain a spot in a university. Learn to do it now. Take the time to check it off now, and then you don't have to worry nearly as much about possible issues in the future.